The air in the courtroom hung thick and still, heavy with the dust of old paper and the ghosts of 1,000 arguments. It smelled like fear and stale coffee. Outside, the city roared, but here, the sound was muted, a low thrum beneath the sharper, closer noises, the squeak of a shoe on polished wood, the rustle of papers, the slow tick of a clock that seemed to measure not time, but suffering. I sat straight, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. Across the aisle, he sat, looking impossibly calm, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Beside him, she sat, her eyes darting towards me with a look that was a mixture of triumph and mild boredom. Her hair was perfect. Of course, it was perfect. Everything about them in that moment seemed designed to be a perfect, polished insult. My lawyer was a rock, solid and quiet beside me, his gaze fixed on the judge. The judge, perched high behind the bench, seemed like an oracle, distant and powerful, holding the fate of my shredded life in their hands. This was it. The final hearing. The decree. The end. After months of tearing apart a life built brick by careful brick over 2 decades, we were here for the final, brutal pronouncement. I just wanted it over. I wanted to walk out of this room, breathe air that didn't taste of betrayal, and begin the impossible task of piecing myself back together. He leaned forward then, interrupting some procedural point my lawyer was making. My lawyer paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before settling back into professional neutrality. The judge inclined their head, a silent invitation for him to speak. He cleared his throat, and the sound seemed too loud in the sudden quiet.
He didn't look at me.
He looked at the judge, then turned slightly, just enough to include her, the woman beside him, in his gaze. And then he spoke. His voice was low, steady, carrying just the right amount of feigned emotion. "Your Honor," he began, and a cold dread began to coil in my stomach.
What now?
What fresh hell was he about to unleash? Had he found some hidden clause, some technicality to strip me bare? Before we finalize these proceedings, there's something I feel compelled to do. Something important, to mark this transition, this new beginning. My lawyer shifted, a quiet warning in the movement. My own body had gone rigid. I couldn't breathe properly. What was happening? This wasn't part of the plan. There was no plan for this. The judge watched, impassive, a silent question in their eyes. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket. My eyes followed his hand, unable to look away. He pulled out a small, dark velvet box. It caught the light from a high windows. A ring box. My blood turned to ice.
No.
He wouldn't. Not here.
Not now.
Not in front of everyone. The courtroom felt like it was tilting. The air grew even thinner. The perfect hair beside him seemed to shimmer. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. He turned fully towards her then, the box held openly in his hand. He looked into her eyes, his voice softening, though it still carried clearly through the silent room. "Sarah," he said, using her name, the name I'd seen in texts, heard whispered on voicemails, the name that had been a constant, burning coal in my gut for months. "Sarah, you have been my strength, my light, my future, through all of this darkness." He gestured vaguely towards me, a dismissive flick of his wrist that felt like a physical blow. "Now that I am finally free, there is only one thing I want." He opened the box. Even from where I sat, I could see the flash of the stone inside. It was large, ostentatious, a statement, a declaration. "Sarah," he repeated, his voice thick with performative emotion, "will you marry me?" He was proposing to his mistress during our divorce hearing, in the courtroom, in front of the judge, our lawyers, and God knows who else was listening. A wave of heat rushed through me, followed by a chill so profound I thought I might shatter. Humiliation, white-hot and absolute, washed over me.
How dared he?
How utterly, completely without shame could one person be? This wasn't just ending a marriage. This was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty designed to break me utterly, publicly. He wanted to grind my face in the dirt one last time, to show the world he was moving on, happy, instantly replacing me before the ink was even dry on our divorce decree. The world narrowed to that velvet box, that flashing stone, his smug face, her simpering smile. They were a tableau of betrayal, framed by the mahogany of the courtroom. But then, something shifted. The white-hot humiliation didn't consume me. Instead, it sparked a different kind of fire. A cold, hard, diamond-sharp rage. This wasn't suffering. This was a declaration of war. He had just brought the battlefield into the one place where I still had a chance to fight on equal terms. And in that instant, just as he finished the question, just as Sarah's face started to bloom into a triumphant smile, the judge's gavel struck. Not a loud, final bang, but a sharp, decisive tap. The judge didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge the spectacle. They looked down at the papers in front of them, then lifted their gaze, not to him, but to the clerk sitting below. "Clerk," the judge's voice was clear, steady, cutting through the silent, stunned air like a knife. "Confirm receipt of Exhibit C, filed moments ago." The clerk, a young woman with sharp eyes hidden behind sensible glasses, nodded briskly. She typed something into her computer. A moment later, a small light blinked on her screen. "Confirmed, Your Honor," she stated, her voice equally neutral. "Exhibit C received and timestamped." The judge nodded, then turned their attention back to my husband, whose hand was still outstretched, holding the open ring box towards a now very confused-looking Sarah. His mouth was still open, frozen in the triumphant smile of a man who thought he had just won everything. "Mr. Davis," the judge said, their voice regaining some of its stern formality. "The court has received a last-minute filing, designated Exhibit C, which appears to be a motion for an immediate freeze on all marital assets, predicated on newly presented evidence of attempted concealment and fraudulent transfer of funds." My husband blinked. The smile faltered. Sarah's face went from confused to alarmed. "Your Honor," my husband stammered, lowering his hand slightly. The ring box trembled. "What is this?" We were in the middle of something. The judge's expression remained utterly unmoved. "Indeed, you were, Mr. Davis. However, the timing of this filing is legally sound, and the preliminary evidence presented is compelling enough to warrant immediate consideration. The court hereby grants the motion for a temporary, immediate freeze on all named marital assets, pending a full review of Exhibit C and a subsequent hearing to address these serious allegations." My husband stared at the judge, his face draining of color. The courtroom was silent again, but the tension was now a physical force, pressing down on everyone. Sarah looked from him to the judge, her eyes wide with panic. "Freeze. Freeze on all assets," my husband whispered, the arrogance completely gone from his voice, replaced by a dawning horror. "That is correct, Mr. Davis," the judge confirmed, their voice cold and final. "All joint accounts. All individual accounts derived from or commingled with marital funds. All real estate holdings under review. All investment portfolios. Temporarily frozen. Effective immediately.
No transactions. No transfers.
Nothing." My husband's face twisted. It wasn't just disappointment or frustration. It was pure, unadulterated agony.
His jaw dropped.
The ring box slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered onto the polished wood floor. The large, ostentatious stone winked mockingly under the fluorescent lights. Sarah gasped. My husband let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, but a strangled, guttural cry of pure, incandescent rage and despair. It echoed in the silent courtroom. "And oh," he roared, lunging halfway out of his chair. You can't do this. Everything. That's everything." His lawyer was instantly on his feet, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him back down. "Control yourself, sir," he hissed. The judge, for the first time, showed a hint of displeasure. Their voice was sharp, commanding. "Mr. Davis, you are in a court of law. Restrain yourself, or I will hold you in contempt." But he wasn't listening. He was staring at me now, his eyes wild, filled with accusation and something akin to terror. "You," he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger across the aisle. "You did this. You manipulative bitch. What did you do?" The courtroom erupted in a low murmur. The bailiff shifted, taking a step towards him. My lawyer put a protective hand on my arm, though I barely felt it. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just looked back at him. And for the first time in a long time, I let him see what was in my eyes. Not pain. Not sadness. Not even rage anymore. Just a vast, empty, and utterly cold expanse of nothing. Towards him, anyway.
Towards them.
He stood there, shaking, his proposal forgotten. The ring box lying on the floor like a discarded toy, Sarah looking utterly horrified beside him, the carefully constructed facade of his new beginning, having just imploded spectacularly in front of everyone. He thought he was ending things with a final, crushing blow of public humiliation. He thought he was walking away clean, rich, and ready for his happy new life on my emotional and financial ruins.
He thought he had won.
He had no idea. If you've ever felt this way, tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. The story didn't begin in that courtroom, of course. No life ends or begins in a single, dramatic moment, no matter how much the movies like to pretend. It begins quietly, incrementally, a series of small choices and compromises that lead you down a path you never intended to walk. My path had led me to him, and for 20 years, we had walked it together. We had built a life that looked, from the outside, like success. A nice house, comfortable careers, the quiet rhythm of shared routines. There were good moments, of course. Laughter over dinner, lazy Sunday mornings, the easy shorthand of two people who knew each other inside out. We weren't the couple who painted grand romantic gestures on the sky, but we were.
Solid.
We were a team. Or so I thought. My normal life was quiet competence. I worked as a project manager, meticulous and organized. I found satisfaction in bringing order to chaos, in seeing a plan come together. At home, I was the anchor, managing the household, the finances, the social calendar. He was the visionary, the entrepreneur, always chasing the next big deal. I admired his drive, his ambition. I trusted him implicitly. He handled most of the money, the investments, the big financial decisions. It made sense. He was better with numbers, more comfortable taking risks. I focused on stability, on making sure the foundation was strong. The disruption didn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrived like a silent creeper vine, insidious and slow. Little things at first. Late nights at the office that turned into all-nighters. Business trips that were extended without much explanation. A new phone that he was suddenly very protective of. His temper grew shorter. He was distant, preoccupied. The easy rhythm of our life together faltered, then began to break. I asked, of course. I wasn't naive. Was he stressed about work? Was something wrong? He was dismissive, irritable. Just a tough project, he'd grunt, or you wouldn't understand the pressures I'm under. I tried to be understanding, to be supportive. I told myself he was just going through a difficult phase. The inciting incident, the moment the carefully constructed world shattered, wasn't a confession. It was a confirmation. I found the messages. A string of texts, intimate, explicit, planning secret weekends away. Not work trips. Not late nights at the office. Weekends with Sarah. Pet names, inside jokes, declarations of a love he hadn't expressed to me in years. The dates lined up with the extended business trips, the unexplained absences. The messages were like shards of glass in my hands. They weren't just words on a screen. They were the sound of my heart breaking, the sight of my future collapsing, the bitter taste of being lied to, day after day after day. The sheer volume of them, stretching back months, maybe even longer, told a story of a parallel life, a betrayal that wasn't a single mistake but a sustained, deliberate choice. I confronted him. There was no dramatic scene with yelling and tears. Just a quiet, shaking presentation of the evidence. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He just looked tired, like I was an obstacle to his happiness. He talked about being unfulfilled, about Sarah understanding him in a way I never could. He made it sound like my fault, like my failure to be his perfect soulmate had driven him into the arms of another woman. That was the second betrayal, somehow colder than the first. The decision to divorce was immediate and absolute.
There was no coming back from this.
The trust was gone, pulverized into dust. The future I thought we had vanished. I told him I wanted a divorce, that he needed to leave. He agreed, with surprising ease. He said he wanted a clean break too. He wanted to be with Sarah openly. That's when the early struggles began. The shock wore off, replaced by the grinding reality of unraveling a shared life. There were lawyers to find, papers to file, finances to untangle. And the emotional toll was immense. The public humiliation was harder than I expected. Friends didn't know what to say.
Some chose sides.
Others just disappeared. His family, who I had been close to, suddenly became distant. Their loyalty was to him, the golden boy. He, meanwhile, seemed to thrive in the chaos. He moved in with Sarah almost immediately. They were visible, unapologetic. Photos started appearing online, them at restaurants, at parties, looking happy, looking free. While I was navigating grief and paperwork, they were building their shiny new life, seemingly without a backward glance. It felt like he was parading his betrayal, rubbing salt into the wound every chance he got. The legal process became a battleground, not just for assets, but for dignity. My lawyer was good, but the system felt slow, impersonal.
And he
was suddenly a different person. The charming, easygoing partner I had known vanished, replaced by a ruthless adversary. He fought me on everything: spousal support, division of property, even ridiculous things like furniture. It wasn't about the value. It was about making things difficult, about punishing me for daring to leave him, for forcing his hand. Rising challenges appeared daily. He started hiding money, transferring funds to accounts I didn't know about, putting assets into Sarah's name or company names. He undervalued properties, inflated debts. He used every trick in the book. His lawyers were aggressive, painting a picture of me as an overspending, unsupportive wife who is now trying to fleece her successful husband. Every meeting with my lawyer brought new frustrations. The money was hard to track. He was always one step ahead, anticipating our moves. The stress was constant, a low hum of anxiety that never left me. Sleep became a luxury. I lost weight. I felt like I was constantly running uphill, slipping back with every step. He seemed untouchable. He had the money, the resources, the sheer nerve to lie and cheat his way through the process. And he had Sarah by his side, a constant reminder of why this was happening and of the future they were building on the ashes of my past. I started to see her not just as the other woman, but as an active participant in his schemes, benefiting from the assets he was trying to steal from me. That added a layer of cold anger to the pain. The midpoint shift wasn't a single event, but a slow dawning. I was sitting in my quiet, half-empty house one evening, staring at a spreadsheet my lawyer had sent over, detailing yet another instance of hidden assets. The numbers swam before my eyes. I felt defeated. Hopeless. What was the point? He was winning. He was always going to win. He was better at this game, the game of deceit, of manipulation. And then, the hopelessness curdled into something else. I looked at his name on the spreadsheet, at the evidence of his lies, and felt a surge of pure, icy fury. He wasn't just hurting me. He was disrespecting everything we had built. He was spitting on our history. He was trying to erase my contribution to our shared life, to walk away with all the spoils as if I had been nothing but a passenger. That's when I stopped feeling like a victim. The pain didn't disappear, but it was overlaid with a hard, brittle shell. I wasn't going to lie down and let him roll over me. I wasn't going to let him rewrite our story, to make me the villain and him the triumphant hero riding off into the sunset with his new love and my money. I decided I wasn't just getting a divorce anymore. I was fighting for justice. Not just legal justice, but a deeper, more personal kind. I wanted him to face consequences. I wanted him to understand that actions have repercussions. I wanted him to lose that smug, untouchable look. My strategy changed. I stopped focusing on the day-to-day legal skirmishes. I started thinking bigger. What was his ultimate goal?
To keep the money.
To start fresh with Sarah, funded by our joint assets. What was his biggest vulnerability? His arrogance. His belief that he was too smart to be caught. His public image of success and respectability. I realized I couldn't beat him at his game of financial trickery alone. But maybe, just maybe, I could change the rules of the game. I started working differently with my lawyer. Instead of just reacting to his moves, I started asking questions, probing for weaknesses in his armor. Where were his blind spots? What was he absolutely convinced I wouldn't find or couldn't use against him? The deepening crisis arrived when his lawyers presented a settlement offer that was insulting. It was a fraction of what was fair, clearly designed to starve me out, to pressure me into giving up. They claimed he had no more hidden assets, that this was the best I could hope for. My lawyer advised that fighting it further could be costly, protracted, and with his skill at concealment, there was a real risk we might not recover much more, even if we found the money. It felt like a punch to the gut. After all the struggle, all the pain, this was the reward? A pittance, dictated by his cruelty? I saw Sarah sitting by his side in court again, confident, beautiful, already spending the money he was trying to hoard. All seemed truly lost. The system felt rigged. The good guys didn't win. The cheaters and liars got away with it. Despair clawed at me. But then, a flicker of the icy resolve returned.
No.
Not this time. Not him. I remembered the messages. The way he looked at me when he said he was unfulfilled, the casual dismissal of our life together. The blatant disrespect he showed me at every turn of the divorce proceedings. The image of him and Sarah, smug and happy, receiving my lawyer's meek acceptance of their insulting offer. I couldn't stomach it. The turning point was quiet, determined. It wasn't a sudden burst of inspiration, but a culmination of months of simmering anger and strategic thinking. I spent hours poring over old bank statements, tax returns, business documents I hadn't looked at in years. I wasn't just looking for hidden money. I was looking for patterns, for anomalies, for anything that felt off. And I found something. Something small, something I had dismissed at the time. A seemingly minor transfer, years ago, to a shell company I'd never heard of. At the time, he'd waved it off as a temporary holding account for a potential investment that didn't pan out. I'd trusted him. Now, looking at the date, the amount, and cross-referencing it with other transactions, a different picture began to emerge. It wasn't a temporary holding account. It was the first step in setting up a separate, untraceable fund, years before the affair.
It was a contingency plan.
He'd been planning for this for a long time. Maybe not the affair specifically, but having a secret stash just in case. This wasn't just hiding assets during the divorce. This was premeditated financial deception within the marriage. And it connected to other things, slightly fudged numbers on tax returns, assets reported differently to different institutions. It wasn't one smoking gun, but a trail of breadcrumbs leading to a hidden vault. It was Exhibit C. I took everything I found to my lawyer. He was skeptical at first. It was complicated, circumstantial. But as we dug deeper, connecting the dots, the pattern became undeniable. It was sophisticated, designed to avoid detection. But he had been too clever, too arrogant to cover every single track. There was enough evidence, enough of a paper trail, to make a compelling case for fraud and attempted fraudulent transfer, grounds for freezing the assets while the full scope was investigated. The plan solidified. We wouldn't just present this as part of the regular negotiation. We would wait until the perfect moment. A moment when he felt most secure, most triumphant, most exposed. The final hearing was scheduled. The stage was set. I knew he would be there with her. I knew he would want to make a show of it. He couldn't resist. That was his greatest weakness. His need to perform, to win, to rub his success in my face. My lawyer worked quietly, diligently, preparing the motion and the supporting evidence. We had to time the filing precisely. Too early, and he might have time to counter. Too late, and the hearing would be over. It had to be filed during the hearing, after things were underway, but before the final decree. The morning of the hearing, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a sharp, focused determination. I put on a dress I hadn't worn in years, one he always liked. Not for him, but for me. A reminder of who I was before all of this, and who I intended to be again. I did my hair, my makeup, presenting a face of composure I didn't entirely feel, but needed to project. Strength wasn't about not being afraid. It was about acting despite the fear. The drive to the courthouse was quiet. My lawyer met me outside. He looked serious, but gave me a brief, reassuring nod. We didn't talk about the plan. It was understood. It was set in motion. Now, we just had to execute. Walking into the courtroom felt like walking into a theater. The familiar faces, the hushed whispers, the weight of expectation. And then I saw them. Him and Sarah. Sitting together, looking every bit the happy, victorious couple. Sarah in a new dress, holding his hand, a smug little smile playing on her lips. He saw me, and that familiar smirk appeared. He thought he knew how this day would go. He thought he had already won. The judge entered. We stood, then sat. The proceedings began. The initial formalities, the review of undisputed points. My lawyer presented our side calmly, professionally. His lawyer countered, just as I expected, rehashing the lowball offer, portraying me as unreasonable. Through it all, he watched me, that smirk never leaving his face. Sarah occasionally whispered something to him, and they would share a private smile. It was a deliberate performance, designed to needle me, to make me feel small and defeated. And then he leaned forward. That moment I described earlier. The interruption. The clearing of the throat. The speech about a new beginning, the hand reaching into his jacket. I watched it unfold, detached somehow, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. The velvet box. The slow opening. Sarah's eyes lighting up. His sickeningly sweet words. My heart pounded, but my gaze was steady. This was it. The moment we had planned for. He was giving his victory speech, sealing his new beginning with a public proposal, cementing his move from one woman to another, using this courtroom as a stage. He thought he was humiliating me one last time, delivering the final blow. He had no idea that by choosing this moment, this public forum, he had just handed me the weapon. As he spoke Sarah's name, as he held out the ring, my lawyer made a small, almost invisible gesture to the clerk. It was the signal. The clerk typed rapidly. The electronic filing of Exhibit C. The timestamp. "Will you marry me?" His voice finished, ringing slightly in the silent room. And then, the judge's gavel. The quiet, decisive tap. The clerk's confirmation. The judge's cold, measured words. Exhibit C. Motion for an immediate freeze on all marital assets. Predicated on newly presented evidence of attempted concealment and fraudulent transfer of funds. His confusion. His faltering smile. The sudden, dawning comprehension. Temporarily frozen. Effective immediately. No transactions. No transfers. Nothing. The color draining from his face. The ring box falling to the floor. Sarah's gasp. And then his scream. That raw, animal sound of absolute devastation and fury.
No.
You can't. That's everything. His eyes found mine, wild with accusation. You, he shrieked. You manipulative bitch. What did you do? What did I do? I didn't just get divorced. I didn't just survive his betrayal and his cruelty. I didn't just uncover his fraud. I waited. I planned. I used his greatest weakness, his need for a public spectacle, his absolute certainty of his own victory, against him. I let him build his moment of triumph, his public declaration of his new, happy future built on my ruin. And then, at the peak of his arrogance, when he felt most invincible, I pulled the pin. I showed the court that the money he wanted to start his new life with, the assets he had fought tooth and nail to keep for me, the wealth he was proposing on the back of, was tied up in years of deliberate deception. I didn't just expose him. I trapped him. I froze everything, not just for the divorce settlement, but under suspicion of criminal intent. This wasn't just about dividing assets anymore. It was about investigating financial fraud. His carefully constructed world didn't just crumble, it imploded. In front of Sarah. In front of his lawyer. In front of the judge. In front of anyone who might have been watching or listening. He wasn't just losing money. He was losing his reputation, his freedom of movement, potentially facing serious legal consequences beyond the divorce. His scream wasn't just about the money being frozen. It was the sound of his entire, arrogant plan crashing down around him. It was the sound of a man who thought he was invincible, realizing he had been utterly, completely outplayed. I watched him, his face a mask of horror and rage, and felt nothing but a profound, cold satisfaction settle deep in my bones. It wasn't joy. Joy felt too light, too frivolous for the weight of everything that had happened. It was the grim, quiet satisfaction of justice, hard won. It was the feeling of reclaiming my power, of refusing to be a victim. It was the proof that even when someone tries to steal everything from you, they can't steal your ability to fight back, to think, to plan. The bailiff escorted him out, still sputtering protests, his lawyer looking utterly mortified. Sarah, pale and shaken, followed quickly after them, leaving the expensive ring lying forgotten on the floor. The courtroom slowly returned to a semblance of order. The judge, composed once more, addressed the remaining participants. The divorce hearing was adjourned, pending the investigation into the newly presented evidence. The asset freeze remained in place. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. The city roar seemed louder, but different now. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like life, continuing. I wasn't skipping or celebrating. My legs felt heavy. My heart still thrummed with the aftershocks of the confrontation. But the crushing weight I had carried for months was gone, replaced by something lighter, harder, and free. There was still a long road ahead, the investigation, the legal battles that would follow. But the fundamental power dynamic had shifted. He was no longer the one with all the control, all the secrets, all the advantages. He was exposed, vulnerable, and facing the consequences of his actions. I didn't know what the future held financially, but I knew this. I hadn't walked away empty-handed. I had walked away with my dignity, my strength, and the quiet knowledge that I had faced the worst someone could do to me and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. I had taken his moment of ultimate betrayal and twisted it into his moment of ultimate downfall. And that was worth more than any amount of money he could have stolen. Walking away, I didn't look back. The past was behind me, frozen just like his assets. My future, uncertain but entirely my own, stretched out before me. It felt like a blank canvas, intimidating, yes, but also full of infinite, terrifying, beautiful possibility. The pain would linger, a scar, but it would be a scar of survival, not of defeat. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.